Blast Wall with Lisa Traxler, Part 2. This podcast was supported using public funding by the National Lottery through Arts Council England. I will be talking about my solo art exhibition, Blast Wall, exploring the notion of home and my relationship to my own distinctive home, a decommissioned World War II radar bunker. I'm arriving at the Foundry Gallery to meet Liz Goode, who is the director. Hello.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi Liz. How are you doing?
I'm okay. How are you?
Really good. Lovely to be here. We've been talking some time about this exhibition, haven't we? So it's really lovely now to have it installed.
I think it's been over a year.
Yes, lots of chats.
Planning. And unplanning.
Yeah, but yeah, exactly, in and out of lockdowns. But I think that's what's made it quite important, the subject matter of the work, and also, I suppose, doing it whilst all that's going on. And you did manage to come and see my studio on the Isle of Wight.
Which was amazing.
Brilliant. That was in the autumn, wasn't it? In between lockdowns.
Yeah, that was in between lockdowns
because
because it was cold and wet. I do remember that. But yeah, lovely studio space.
Well, I think also for you to see the actual blast wall that I talk about in my work, which is such an important element, which is the World War II radar bunker that's attached to my home. And it really, I suppose the work really investigates that, and that's what this was all about. Having that notion of home and how important all the idea of home was. I suppose not just to me, everybody was in that situation. I think that made it more powerful.
Yeah, and I think it was really important to see the bunker and the blast wall, to be able to understand the space, how light moves through the space, what it's like to walk through it or to be in it, and what happens to the sound around you, but also the surface of the walls,
the texture,
the floor,
absolutely,
and how it's sort of your house cuts into it, but it cuts into your house as well. So even though your house is attached to a bunker, the bunker's also attached to your house.
So I guess
which is what I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, I think those elements of geometry, I think that was quite important, really. I mean, for me as the artist to have you as the gallery's curator come and actually witness that was really important, and also see my working environment in the studio. And I think we've talked about that, haven't we, about how does the work look there where it was made, and then how does it look here in the gallery space. You know what I found interesting was the fact that the dimensions of the blast wall, which is the area around the outside of the bunker, that's the thick wall that actually would protect it. So that actual space is very similar in dimensions to this gallery space. And for me, it was a really great synergy, I think, of the work being outside and made for the blast wall, and then bringing the work here to the gallery itself. So pretty much dimensions 3.5 meters across. I think your gallery is over 8 meters, and then the blast wall is just about 10. So really quite incredible.
So if you look at the backyard as well, you do have, you've got the same proportions.
Absolutely the same. And so this gallery space we're sitting in now, it's beautiful white space, but it's actually got the contours of the building in it, because it's an old building, isn't it?
It's Victorian. I don't actually know how old it is, but it's the ground floor of the Victorian townhouse.
It's beautiful. I like the fact that you can kind of see the workings, maybe where a chimney would have been, or you know, the sash windows and that. And I think the other thing also is, as you come through the glass door, which has got a plate glass, big glass window at the front, so you can see in as you're walking past the street. And as you come through that door, your eye, it reaches right through the gallery space to the back, where you've got another large window and into sort of a courtyard area. So that light is coming front and back, and that's really beautiful. So for me to have the ghost sculptures in here, which are the main part of the blast wall exhibition, with their apertures, which are sort of mimicking or talking about the apertures in the blast wall of the radar bunker, just connects that visually, you know, to a landscape, because it's sort of going through outside into the outside again. You've
kind of got the foreground, midground, background in the gallery space.
Quite an unusual situation.
You're coming in through the window, you've got the foreground, you can see the sculptures from the window. But obviously when you come in, you're amongst the sculptures, but you can also see through into the yard.
It's a lovely
and the
feeling.
foliage that's out there.
Yeah.
It kind of marries up the sculptures and it kind of makes them sit really comfortably in the space.
Oh, it's lovely. Because I think we talked about this, didn't we, about how this interior and exterior, and I think, I mean, I know when I was initially thinking about the ideas and the shape and form of the work that was going to be produced, I was aware, obviously I knew the bunkers, the blast wall space very well, because I'd spent so much time, particularly in lockdown, spent that time in it, and this idea of time moving and watching the shape and shadows on the walls. But I also knew I wanted sculptural works that were quite sort of linear, so they were quite tall and they would fit it. So rather than sort of pieces that sprawled out across the gallery floor, I wanted these uprights that slotted together, you know, and they actually sort of worked almost components in a way, so that they can be moved around in the gallery space, but they also are important with their edges. So the edges between them have the shapes and show the apertures through as well. So that became really important.
Also at like viewfinders. So you're like where I'm sitting, I can see through the sculptures onto the sculpture behind it and then back out onto the street. And then I can also see the wall sculptures as well.
It sort of fragments it, doesn't it? It's
that
kind of fragmented view of what's beyond.
Which I quite enjoy that it's helping you see the work in different ways.
So on the walls, we've installed the 20 letters, which are these 20 assembled, almost sort of wall constructions. And I suppose they're alluding to the landscape that you can see through the blast wall itself, but they're also alluding to the 20 letters that were written by my great uncle, the Lance Corporal, who was stationed in Burma during the Second World War. And these letters were rediscovered by my family during lockdown. So whilst I was working on the ghost sculptures, I was also transcribing these letters. And I think that was very powerful. This idea of history and place and lineage and layering all those details. And also the 20 letters allude to previous works, because I often like to bring elements from previous works, you know, as an ongoing dialogue through my art practice. And these have elements from an exhibition, Dazzle and Disrupt, that I've got on at Key Arts. So it
links the two together.
Yes, very much. And also the historical connotations with it, and researching history and stuff. So
the shapes on the wall sculptures, are they the cutouts? The sculptures which are in Dazzle and Disrupt.
So the big time traveller transformation, they had apertures cut because they were this fragmented landscape, really talking about the disruption and of the dazzle camouflage and that phenomenon from the First World War. But then they needed to have these pieces sort of dissected out of them, and they were in my studio, and it just seemed like a natural progression to work with those shapes again, because they were almost echoing the geometry that was coming through from the shadows onto the blast wall. So, I mean, there was a lot of process to them. I had to sand them all back, and, you know, the colour palette had to work with, you know, what this body of work was about. But somehow they just seemed to sort of talk and connect with one to the other.
So how did you choose the shapes and putting them together? What was your process?
It was a little bit like the work I do when I'm working with collage, because I work a lot from two to three dimension. So the pieces sort of two-dimensionally, maybe a collage piece, and then they come off the wall and they're made three-dimensionally. But then it was a case of taking the three-dimensional from the sculptures back to the two-dimensional again for the wall. So it's sort of backwards.
It's gone backwards and forwards.
And I think that is using the same ideas really that I use in my collage paintings. So you have your shape and form, and these sort of start moving around I suppose your backdrop in a way.
So it's really interesting that your background is in fashion and textiles.
Yes, yeah.
And I can see that from images that you've taken of work on your studio desk, they almost do look like
the little cardboard,
yes,
the little components. Yeah.
And it's also the fact that taking something from a two-dimensional design, constructing a garment, is very much your method of working. So how did it transition from fashion and textiles into fine art?
I guess it's always been creative. So that's something that's always been there throughout my life, from my childhood onwards. So I did my degree in fashion and textiles, but I was I was always interested in this idea of the component and the idea of the pattern pieces that come from one sort of panel or one sort of sheet of fabric or whatever it may be, and then the fact that we can then make them into this three-dimensional for the body, you know, so they fit in the round. And so when I started with my art practice, I guess that wasn't evident right at the beginning, but I used to paint a lot, you know, just doing sort of straightforward paint on canvas, but elements of geometry started coming in because of situations that I was working in, and also thread started appearing in my work. So that was sort of almost bringing that element in. And then I guess it was just a natural progression, and it felt right to almost the, you know, the two-dimensional aspect. The frame was holding me in, so I needed to take those components out of the frame and build them so that I could almost put them together like a garment, so that, you know, walking around it is almost like wearing it, so it's in the three-dimensional. And then what does happen if you then deconstruct that again and take it back to the wall, and it's made into something else? So I love this idea of this, it flows backwards and forwards from 2 to 3, and it's always to do with form, colour, shape. They're always the elements that I seem to be. So I do play a lot in the studio with little, you see all the little shapes everywhere, because they inform so much. I mean, you know, they will inform a two-dimensional collage painting as well as being in the three-dimensional. It just seems to operate in my brain that way.
Yeah, it seems like this multidisciplinary approach is really integral to your practice.
Yes, very much.
And it's almost strangely when you were saying about taking elements from one piece of work, physical elements, and then remaking them into something else. It's almost a bit like the make, do, and mend philosophy around World War II. If you're taking something apart to remake it.
I love that idea. That's a really beautiful concept in a way, isn't it? Because I think also in this day and age, it is that idea of let's reuse, let's recycle, let's try and look out for what we're doing. And it does, in a way, register a little bit with past. When I was a fashion editor and costume designer, I used to love working with secondhand clothes. So I'd always kind of try and sneak them into a shoot, you know, amongst some designer thing. I love that juxtaposition of this sort of old that's been worn and has a history to it against something that's this brand new sort of shiny situation. So I think it's lovely actually bring that up, because that is that idea of let's draw that in, and actually in using those things, those elements from previous works, they've got a history to them. So everything's almost got this tactile quality, so that it holds a resonance. It's a bit like going into a building that holds.
As well, the surface of the wall pieces, some of them, I mean, they're not flat. There might be indents in them where they might have been hit by something. So it's you can see the surface coming through the paint, and obviously where then you sanded back other parts, it's very flat. So I think it's almost got a really nice pattern.
Yes, it's that texture, isn't it? So then again, that's a very sort of fabric type orientated way of feeling it. It is a feel, because it's like that constant touch.
I know they're lovely to hold because they're heavy, and obviously having only seen them in photographs, actually unpacking them yesterday was really exciting, because I hadn't seen the three-dimensionality of them.
It was lovely to see it through. Yes, it was lovely to see it through your eyes, because I sent you photos obviously, so you knew what was coming.
Yeah.
But then I know that you did sort of exclaim there, but
they're more three-dimensional than
2D, as it were. And I really like that, because actually they are. I wanted them to look like they'd almost been played, these pieces, because they're very simple in one way. They are just 2 or 3 components that are just sort of placed strategically. I mean, they have to work together against each other, aligning with shape. But they're almost slightly playful quality. But this idea, I suppose, because they allude to these letters from my great uncle, and he wrote in such a lyrical way, so it's almost, is it talking about a sort of a secret code in a way, or a secret language, and the texture on them. I didn't want to cover up all the little indents of the wood or the bit where, like you say, where it's sanded some places. I mean, from a distance they look quite smooth, but then if you actually spend a bit of time quite close up, so I love how we've installed them in the gallery, so you actually can witness them sort of quite close.
So actually it's almost as if you could reach out and hold them like letters. And the way that we've installed them is in 2 lines in the gallery space, and it's almost as if they're pages of the letters unfurling each other. unfurling from each other, should I say?
Yeah. So you can read as you go along.
Yeah, so it's almost like you're reading like how you would read from left to right. And I think strangely as well with the letters, we've started hanging them from left to right.
Oh, we did, didn't we?
Which is what I thought about last night, going, we've naturally gone left to right.
I think because as we were installing, we were talking about this, weren't we, about this idea of when you have that and you hold that letter and that purpose of it.
And then you've got the next page and you've got the next page and it's different. So it'd be different from your great uncle's letters, obviously each letter being very different, but obviously still contained in the paper format.
Yes, because they're all sort of hung off a cradle panel. So they're first, the back panel is all a certain dimension and they sort of hang off from that. So they've all got a line of similarity running through them in that way. I'm just thinking as we're talking about the letters, it was amazing to be able to transcribe them because they had been almost lost to our family for so long, and just to refine them. And I don't think they haven't been transcribed before. So that was quite special for me to be able to do that. But I did notice with the letters, you could see where they'd been maybe held and read many times. So it was one of the things I wanted to try and get across in the 20 letters, wall sculptures, is the fact that they have a tactile quality. So they are acrylic over the wood, but then I've actually brushed a beeswax on them to create this quite beautiful, it's slightly matte, but it's got a depth to it. So I wanted it to look like it's almost been held a lot.
Yeah, like the oils from your hands. When we were talking about wood yesterday and what happens to the varnish and
the touch
and,
of it.
And the oils from your hand then go into the wood. So in a way, they have that feeling. I think the other thing is that you can hold them in your hands really easily. It's like holding a page.
Yes.
And the dimensions of them.
Yes. But I think this thing of, with these letters, you know, he wrote very beautifully, but they were very ordinary and they talked of home and domesticity and just the ordinary that we all lived through. This is why I think they were so powerful. But every time he wrote the word home, he used the capital H. And so for me, that dovetailed so completely into how I was feeling about my home and the blast wall. And that connection of where we all were in lockdown. And I think whilst I was doing all this work, I was looking at the paintings of Paul Nash because I find it very moving, and I just find that idea, the energy he works with as well. And he talks about his home, or he talked about his home as being this special place, his sanctuary, this genius loci, this place that you almost gravitate to, not a place that's got a spirit in it, but a place that you almost fill with your own spirit. And this is how I feel the letters from my great uncle were filled with his own spirit of what he felt home was. So they were very important for him to write them as much as for his family to receive them. So this, I love that thought, that spirit of place.
The 20 letters, wall sculptures, are they a different body of work to the ghost sculptures, the freestanding sculptures? Are they meant, could they be seen separately, or do they always have to be seen together?
I like the idea that they could be seen in a different situation, because otherwise, if you always have to see them in the same format, it's not always possible within where they're placed. So I like the idea they could be seen separately. I suppose also they were made for the gallery space in the way that I wanted them to be seen through the ghost sculptures, through the apertures of the ghost sculptures. That was really important to them. And I just think the ghost sculptures against the 20 letters, they each make each other quite important. They need to sort of work together in that way. They just tell a complete story of what was going on at the time when they were being made.
But do you think what's interesting about the ghost sculptures is they're vertical sculptures, whereas your sculpture in Key Arts at the moment is much more horizontal?
Yes, so they're the ones that sort of sprawl across
the floor. They sprawl across, whereas these sort of like stand like trees or soldiers, and they're quite still.
They have got stillness, haven't they? I think, yes.
Which is a very different dynamic to your...
Well, you're right.
To your other work.
The other ones sort of almost cavort through the gallery space.
It was like that they're twisting and turning and moving into the space, whereas these stand quite still.
So I guess this is what it's doing, is it's talking about where they're from, the stillness of the blast wall at that time. And I used to sit in the blast wall quite a lot during lockdown, and it's got these sort of fortified walls around it, but it's open. The sky, it's open to the elements and open to the sky, and it's almost like a James Turrell skyscape, you know, where you can actually watch, and you're directed upwards. So I knew I wanted this upward sort of feeling to this work. It needed to be this sort of linear, and also it's referring to how the actual blast wall and the bunker itself was built. So it's got this steel rods within it, like a skeleton of steel rods, which is its framework, and then obviously it's made with shuttered concrete, this beautiful textured shuttered concrete. And so the actual painting on the skin surface of the ghost sculptures, they originally started as big panels. So I was painting these massive panels. I actually painted them in the bunker because they were too big to go in my studio, so I needed to. They were massive. So, but they had a grid painted on them, and all the shapes, all the little diagonals and the lines and the geometric shapes that come off this sort of central steel rod grid idea that I was painted onto them. So it's talking about the process of the build of the blast wall itself. It's also talking about the process of the surface texture, and then that would then take us on to what the colour palette is, which is
what I wanted to talk about as well. It's sort of like, so how important is colour to your work?
It seems to be permeating more and more. I think that is also a nod back to my fashion background. I just love working with colours and also seeing what something does next to each other, you know, that shape and what's happening with it. And so for me, these ghost sculptures and the 20 letters had to have a grounding in where I'm from, my genius locale, my spirited place, which is the landscape around me. It's quite wild where my studio is and where the bunker is on the south coast of the island.
Right on the edge of the island.
It is. It's sort of away.
You're kind of almost.
Next stop is
it's away from the road, because you're going from the road, you're going down, and then obviously that little piece of farmland in front.
Yes, it's got a big space. I mean, it's a part of the island that's sort of quite unruly and unkempt. It's not sort of, you know, it hasn't got very sort of flat and easy to sort of traverse beaches. It's got lots of rocks and cliffs, and for the island anyway. I mean, it's not mountains, but it's rocks, and it was an ideal situation to put a radar bunker, because you know how it was sort of almost hugged into the landscape.
It's like the landscape. The landscape is kind of hugging your house.
It does.
It's almost like it's become part of where you live, and the bunker has almost become part of the landscape itself, like integral, like it's meant to be there.
But this is the beauty of it, and the fascination for me that's been coming through in this work is how that brutalist building, you know, this World War II radar bunker can sit. There's just nature, you know, that it's very rural. It's this ideal, almost this sort of ideal landscape.
It's been inserted.
But somehow it works really well. Somehow it has a sense of itself in that place, and it just seems to work. And I just think that colour palette just comes from being constantly. I mean, my studio's on site, so I have big windows looking out over the landscape, and I walk my dog every day, and that sort of informs so much. So, but it's also probably a colour palette of camouflage, military camouflage, you know. But then that's it. That's that combination. That's how it's working together. You know, this sort of flash of yellow that runs through it, because the colours are quite muted as we're looking through now. The gallery space.
They all sit really nicely next to each other. The colours.
That's it. So the colours work, but then you have this little flash of yellow, just stripe running through, and this is, for me, I like to think of it as almost the lapel of.
It's almost like braiding.
The braiding on a bit of military uniform.
Or the stitch on a lapel.
That little thing. But it's also alluding to, when I go walking with my dog, there's a lot of gorse bushes and wild foliage on that part of the island, and certain times of the year you get this beautiful, sort of almost flaming yellow little bud that comes from these bushes, and so it's sort of, is it talking about that? Is it talking about this research? So it's, how do I merge these two?
Or can it talk about both?
Yeah, I think so. So this is what it is, isn't it? This is my landscape here. This is my place.
Some of the colours, I mean, I'm from Portsmouth and I've never been to the Isle of Wight until I come to your house, because it was always there, but you just never went. So the colours, to me, particularly the more teal and the darker greens are very much the colour of the Solent.
That's interesting, actually, because you can almost pinpoint it to that.
And having always looked at the Isle of Wight.
Okay, so your perspective,
my perspective
yours is from that side.
So yours is,
mine's
from the other side.
Yeah. I like that.
But the colours are really evocative of the Solent and the Isle of Wight, and reminds me of being little, watching the storms come in.
Yes, that's the beauty of it, isn't it?
And the water change colour depending on the light, can be a million different colours in a day. So is your work ideas-led or materials-led? Because I know that you were really, really involved in the building of your house. And obviously then you're looking at more industrial materials that you've had access to.
Yeah, that's the thing.
You've been working with industrial processes.
So that's been really important. So I think because when we moved to the site where the radar bunker is, the decommissioned radar bunker, we moved there to build our home. And so it sits next to the radar bunker. We wanted to keep the bunker as we'd found it. But in doing this build, I worked very closely on the project. So we were sort of almost living on site, as it were. So it was there all the time. And this happened in 2017, so a few years ago. And for me, the biggest things that were coming through at that time was scale and material. They were the two areas that were just coming at me from doing this. So I think that seeped into the work. So whether it's materials or ideas-led, I think this came together as layers of information at me. And I start in the studio with maquettes, just feeling shape almost, and working out how that's going to happen. And I don't have it all worked out. I don't know. I just start playing really with this three-dimensional form. And in doing that, that tells me what the materials need to be. And I think from the house build, I've worked a lot in vitreous enameled steel and various wood composites and some other strange materials that we got a paper composite we worked in. So that was used on the house for the staircase and on the outside for the little sort of shuttering areas outside. And so when this was being constructed within the house, I was thinking, well, this is just such beautiful material. Can I make this sculpture? What can I do within my art practice to sort of bring this in? And so working with that obviously starts giving you different scale, an idea of different scale. And it was just brilliant because it meant I could work beyond the studio and beyond the idea of, the framed work of a piece of art. And it's just been very exciting because it's pushing all the boundaries to create this work that's becoming bigger and it can fill a space, but with intent.
Yeah. So do you think working on your house has given you the confidence to work bigger and to experiment more with materials that aren't seen as traditional artistic materials?
Yeah, I suppose I've always erred on the side of larger. My paintings previously used to be up to 3 meters and stuff. So that was always something I was quite comfortable with. It was just naturally how it evolved. But I think the idea of new materials for me as an artist and the excitement, and I also like the excitement of working with a material that isn't necessarily seen as a fine art material. I quite like putting that in the mix, that it's almost just throw it in and let's do something with this, because why should it just be for that? And why should something else just be for another choice? So I quite like bringing in that, I don't know, misbehaviour sometimes because it's not seen or it's not worked with, or it's not used. I know when I work with AJ Wells and Sons on the island, they're the enamel. They do all the signs for London Underground. They're amazing factory. But I know when I go to those guys with the project, they are so patient and so willing to work with the artist. And we've come up with pieces of work that haven't been worked on before sculpturally. So it's really exciting. And I like that idea of the process that you have to work it out. So there's a load of working out. It's not just painting it or cutting out the shape. It's actually the construction. And I like to know every step of it. I have to be involved.
You're very involved.
I can't just send it off to a
fabricator.
No.
But you're very involved in the whole fabrication process.
I have to know that because it's also, because that's part of its story, isn't it? I think. And I think with the ghost sculptures here in the gallery, I joined again with another island company called Laser Cut. They also work in London with a lot of artists, but they have a space on the island, and it was brilliant because we were just working out stuff that hadn't been done in certain ways before, but how could we make this work? And it's, I suppose, through that and through that collaboration, I guess that you kind of get a confidence because you have to keep believing. But what I find quite exciting is, and also slightly scary, is with these sculptures, you don't quite know how it's going to work until you get them all back and all the finishing's done, and then you put them together and you stand back and they go, has it worked? Yeah, so it's always this question, has it worked? Is it doing what I wanted it to do? Is it saying what I wanted it to say? So it's great to actually see them now installed in the show here.
And where do you see them going next?
They are scheduled to be in a show in the bunker at the end of summer in August at the Bunker Gallery, and we have various artists. Just once a year we put a show on, so they'll go to the bunker for that, which is quite exciting.
It should be really interesting to see how they look in that space, because the light
inside,
is so different, and they're inside.
Yeah, so that will
in
again
a non-traditional gallery space.
Give other elements. So then I think elements of them will go. I'm part of a touring exhibition called Concrete Castles, which is about defence architecture. It's a group exhibition with the curator Tim Craven, and that starts in Bodmin Keep at the Military Museum a little bit later in the year. I think that's July, and then we'll see what happens.
So could these standing sculptures, do you think they could be seen singularly, or do you think they need to be seen as a group?
I like them as a group, as in a family.
Yeah.
You know Barbara Hepworth's sort of family, a man, that idea of the fact that they're almost all elements of a family.
Yeah.
But then those elements of the family can almost then go off and have their own little adventures. So they could, because I did photograph them singularly, to get all when I was doing all the detail sheets for you. And I actually quite like that, because you really then look carefully at each one.
Yeah, it's sort of almost like you're getting to know each one as an individual.
That's it. But I think what's important as a group, and how they do have a strength, is the edges to them, and how those edges operate to each other, because they're not only working from one direction, they're all the way around. So because they're slotted, they've got apertures on all sides, and they've just got sort of various elements working into the next one. So I think as a family, they've definitely got a strength. Looking forward to the opening, and then the show is on for a number of weeks.
Yes.
Thank you so much for talking with me. And let's enjoy the show.
I know.
Thank you. Glass Wall at the Foundry Gallery in Chelsea, 13th of May until the 19th of June, 2021. And then at the Bunker Gallery, Isle of Wight, August the 27th until the 31st, 2021. With thanks to Arts Council England for grant funding, and a special thanks to Liz and Jonathan Goode for all their support from the Foundry Gallery and Lelay Architects. Sound edit and production by Paul Windridge. Artist Lisa Traxler at lisatraxler.com.